Thanks a lot for coming out on this cheery Chilliwack day. I guess the best way to introduce what we're doing here today is to let you know that the petition that we're rallying around has got 83,000 signatures across Canada, and it's a petition that was driven by an organization called Lead Now. I'll give you a brief description of Lead Now so that you understand who we're part of the organizing effort. Lead Now is an independent national advocacy organization that brings generations of Canadians together to achieve progress through democracy. Now, their petition page states this: more and more people are speaking out against the Conservatives' unfair elections law, but this government is hoping they can pass the bill before more Canadians learn about the threat to our voting rights. We need to show Conservative MPs that people in their home ridings oppose this law as it stands, and there will be real political consequences if they pass it without making major changes. And the petition, I believe, is being circulated, so please do add your names if you agree with that assessment. Now, I'm going to introduce the issues that are causing concern in Canada regarding the Fair Elections Act, and probably the best way to describe that is to, first of all, point out something that was published in the Toronto Star February 5th, which indicates one does not need to read between the lines of the bill to come to the conclusion that the Harper government is more inclined to see a higher voter turnout as a threat than as an ideal outcome. At a time when most comparable jurisdictions are looking for ways to reverse a decline in turnout, this legislation put forward February 3rd nudges Canada in the opposite direction. Now, just to summarize what are some of the key issues, it's probably the simplest thing to say is that the key issues in terms of either engaging or discouraging or suppressing voter participation in elections hinge around a couple of key provisions in the new changes to the Elections Act, I should say. The letter that was produced by 160 professors across Canada and addressed to Stephen Harper and the Parliament of Canada. Okay.
I can hold it for you.
That's okay, I'll manage.
Okay.
Sorry about that, how about that? This letter says in part, we, the undersigned, professors at Canadian universities who studied the principles and institutions of constitutional democracy, believe that the Fair Elections Act, Bill C-23, if passed, would damage the institution at the heart of our country's democracy, voting in federal elections. Now, a couple of key points, and then I'll move on to the other speakers here. One of the key points that is being addressed and being suppressed is voter identification, specifically voter information cards. The bill proposes to dispense with the use of VIX as a piece of identification that voters can use. The use of voter cards is especially important for Canadians who lack ID. Canadians such as senior citizens in long-term care facilities, First Nation citizens, students, and those who have recently moved. The letter notes, although not perfect, VICs are more likely to provide an accurate address than most other forms of ID, including driver licenses. We believe the elimination of VICs as a valid form of ID in federal elections would reduce the likelihood of voting by some citizens. And in one more item, vouching. Currently, Elections Canada protects the rights to vote of citizens who lack standard forms of identification by allowing them to take an oath affirming their identity, citizenship, and residence in the polling division, and having a qualified voter from the same polling division vouch for their eligibility. In 2011, approximately 120,000 citizens relied on the vouching provision in order to vote. By eliminating vouching, the Fair Elections Act would disenfranchise many of these citizens. And one last comment. The government argues that vouching is an opportunity for voter fraud, citing the finding of the Newfield Report on Compliance Review that a significant proportion of vouching cases were plagued by irregularities. In fact, the Newfield Report did not cite a single case of fraudulent or ineligible voting arising from the vouching system. To the contrary, the report recommended keeping the vouching system in place as a protection for citizens' right to vote, while working to reduce the need for vouching through enhanced use of the very VICs that Bill C-23 would disqualify. And again, that's from the Newfield Report commissioned by Elections Canada. So that's a very brief introduction to the subject of what are Canadians concerned about in the Unfair Elections Act. And I believe that our best defense and our best action to take is to create further awareness of this. It's important that we let all the constituents know that this isn't right and it needs to be addressed. Thank you very much. At this point in time, I'd like to introduce Louis Dejager. He's the president of the Federal Riding Association for the Liberal Party of Canada, and he's going to share his concerns in this regard. Thanks, Louis.
Great, thanks. I don't know if I need this or not. I'll try without first. Thanks very much, Wayne.
Get that megaphone.
You're a tough crowd here. Thanks very much, Wayne, for getting us together, number one, and actually taking the lead on this and making sure we were all involved, and we had also went to our supporters, and we all took a really hard look at this, and we definitely agree there's a big problem here, and voters need to know what's going on. Things are happening so fast, things are being pushed through so fast. This just needs a little bit of attention. Section 3 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is a section that constitutionally guarantees all Canadian citizens the democratic right to vote in a general, federal, or provincial election. It cannot be overridden by Parliament and provides extra legal protection for the right to vote. Yet again, this Conservative government is challenging one of the basic rights of Canadians. The more one reads through and ponders this Orwellian-sounding Fair Elections Act, the more one has to come to the conclusion that this legislation has more to do with gaming the actual system than providing the Harper Conservatives with more political advantages than it does with just actual fair elections. Indeed, virtually every change, be it upping contribution limits, neutering the chief electoral officer, or even doing away with vouching, is good for the Conservatives and not so good for the opposition parties or for democracy in general. Canada's election challenge is to increase citizen participation by getting more people out to vote, rather than eliminating tools such as the vouching system and the voter information card. Canada's election crisis is related to low voter turnout and uncertainty surrounding the dirty tricks used by political operatives in the last federal election. It's not fraud by individual voters. It's not vouching as suggested by this government. 120,000 people who voted in the last election did so by vouching, mostly seniors, students, and First Nation Canadians. Canadians need to ask themselves an important question. Will the number of cases of fraud prevented actually be greater than the number of people prevented from voting? So that's the first thing people have to ask themselves. We should be having a conversation about bold strategies for increasing participation, like combining electronic and mandatory voting, placing more polling stations in areas that would target lower voter populations, or experimenting with other innovative get-out-the-vote methods. Moving away from first past the post to a preferential ballot, these are real reforms. Muzzling the chief electoral officer and banning Elections Canada from promoting the right to vote, it doesn't get us any closer to any goal. Instead, this government has taken us in a completely opposite direction with this US-style attempt at voter suppression. A Harvard study has estimated that a more stringent voter ID requirement can actually reduce voter turnout in certain groups by as much as 2.2%, the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of Canadians. What kind of coincidence is it that the very forms of voter ID targeted and now disallowed in this Fair Elections Act are the forms that would increase the voting potential of these groups, the same groups less likely to vote for the Conservatives. This bill has been slammed by academics in Canada, by a group of international election law experts from around the world, weighing in at how bad this would be for Canada, for Canadians, for emerging democracies that look up to Canada. It again further erodes the way the world looks at us. The only serious fraud anyone has identified in the last election was the robocalls. and there is good reason to believe that they were perpetrated on behalf of the Conservatives using their database. The Harper Conservatives have been mad at Mr. Mayran, Canada's Chief Electoral Officer, because the Elections Office caught the party red-handed on the in-and-out scheme and red-handed in the robocall affair. So Dr. Evil decided to rein in the power of the Chief Electoral Officer when it comes to launching investigations into violations of electoral law, and as he does with those whom they decide are enemies, to weaken the powers of Elections Canada as well. And because Elections Canada is onto these scandals, robocalls, fraudulent overspending, well then Dr. Evil just changes the election rules. And now the winning candidate from the previous election gets to appoint the central polling supervisor. It can also be left up to the candidate's political district association or even the candidate's political party to now appoint the referees to the next election. If this all scares you, it should, because it scares the hell out of me too. Changes in the electoral law should be more consensual, not pushed through Parliament by the governing party acting alone. Democracy and elections do not belong to any one party. Organizing them is not the responsibility of the government of the day. This totalitarian pattern is consistent of this government. When media became a threat, Dr. Evil created Harper TV. Only his media takes the pictures and does the interviews, then passes it out to public sources. When science became a threat, he took out the scientists. We also now have the National Energy Board, which is regulating the very environment they exploit. Both Health Canada and Fisheries Canada have had their mandates changed from protecting the actual industry they watch over to protecting the interests of the businesses that exploit their industries as well. This dangerous protocol is the mandate of the Harper government. Control, control, control. Removing anything that stands in their way, and if that means who gets to vote, then so be it. Yesterday, Conservatives used their majority to defeat amendments made and supported by all the opposition parties to the Fair Elections Act by a vote of 149 to 131. Not one single Tory MP, including our MP Mark Strahl, saw fit to break ranks despite mounting public opposition to this bill. This bill needs your public opposition and should be challenged at every level. This government is becoming desperate in self-preservation as we approach the next election. Now more than ever, we need you to get out the vote. Thank you very much for being out here and supporting this bill. And Gwen?
Can you hear me okay? All right, so I'm going to make my words in likeness to me. Short but sweet. So I just want to thank you all for coming out here today on this lovely afternoon, because you care about Canadian democracy and you care about what's going on. And I want to share just a little story. I mean, obviously we've all met at other rallies, right? It seems sometimes that we're just regular attenders. But I want to let you know that when I first got involved politically, my friend sent me this really beautiful Facebook image. And I keep it in my mind every time I head out to do an event such as this. It was quite simply the image of this woman's feet dangling down, about ready to put her foot into a slipper. And the caption underneath of it said, "Be the kind of woman that the minute your foot hits the floor in the morning, the devil says, 'Oh crap, she's awake.'" So when we're here today, it feels like we're maybe wrestling with the devil in some ways, right? Because this has really been insidious. So many people do not know what is going on. And as my two colleagues have explained, and certainly I want you to know, this is truly nonpartisan. Obviously, I'm a member of the New Democratic Party. Wayne Fraze is a former Green Party campaign manager, and Louis is the Federal Riding Association for the Federal Liberals. And there are many of you here that represent other grassroots organizations. I see Jennifer Woodruff from ACT, Glenn Thompson from Friends of Chilliwack River Valley. I see people from Waterwell, I see business owners here. I see my president, Al Enns, from the Federal NDP Riding Association, and I think I see my president from the Chilliwack Home Riding Association, and many others. This is a phenomenal grouping of people from a variety of backgrounds dealing with an issue that is really, really important, especially when we're facing historic lows when it comes to voter turnout. Now, my two colleagues, I appreciate that they wrote up a lot of technical jargon. That is really important. But here's what I want you to do today. First off, I want to thank you for coming. That was step number 1. Step number 2 is we're going to hand out a petition. If you haven't signed it online, we want you to sign it here today. Step 3, grab a sign. As you see our sign people, woohoo, over there. We've got signs. We've got Canadian flags. Stay around and let's make some noise. Get a democracy dog and enjoy your lunch hour here with us today. But when you leave here, tell your friends and tell your neighbors about what is going on. Tell them. And if they ask you, and I'm going to share something personal, how important really is vouching? Is it really a big deal? You let them know that over 100,000 Canadians used vouching in the last election. And you can tell them that I vouched. Former MLA Gwenna Mahoney also used vouching in election. Do that. You can tell them that this is the party that is responsible for the robocalls. Should they really be tampering with the rules? Tell them that.